Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalization. So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, welcome back. It's another episode of the Koala podcast. And it's been a while since we've spoken to Rob Meija at Stockton University in New Jersey, I think good 18 months ago. Since then, he's written the book, the Essentials Cannabis book, and we're going to talk about that. And then if we have time towards the end of the show, we'll just have a general conversation about New Jersey, New York, and what he's doing at Stockton, because he has been running one of the longest sort of cannabis related sort of tertiary courses in the US. So as I say, because it's 18 months, we should probably catch up on that. And before we start, I've got to do that internet influencer thing by saying, if you're watching this or listening to this on YouTube, because I don't have anybody watching a blank screen, do hit that subscribe button. Rob, welcome to the Koala podcast. Say it's been a while since we spoke, and you've written a book in the interim.
I've been actually quite busy with so many different projects, Sean, but I appreciate us starting out with the book, which is actually a second edition. And here's my pre-publication author copies. So it is called The Essential Cannabis Book. And of course, being an academic, it has a long subtitle. So it is understanding,
well, of course it has
appreciating.
Long, you've got to keep it convoluted if you're an academic.
Cultivating and cooking with marijuana. But actually, what I'm actually pretty proud of about this book is that I learned a lot from the first edition about what people wanted, what they really responded to, what I needed to expand. So just for a couple quick examples, I've added more charts. I've had so many people ask me about things like dosing. They want to start using CBD, for example, because they don't want to get high, but they're worried about inflammation. They have some other health issues. And often I'll take them through a whole sort of schedule about how they should be using, what to expect. And now that chart is actually in the book.
Guide people away from buying things in brightly colored packages to actually just to actually just buying, a white label and then being able to understand how to medicate at home?
That's part of it. There actually is a whole separate chapter on personal and responsible consumption. Because one of the things that I've always believed in is that if you are educated about cannabis, educated about your body, educated about health, you're going to make better choices. So a lot of it is starting with what is your goal? So if you're going to use cannabis, what is your intention? Why are you using it? And then let's look at the different ways you could use it, because some are more effective than others. Some have more side effects than others. And some is just personal preference. For example, some people would never smoke, although that still remains the number one form of consumption, for the very simple reason that the effects are felt very quickly, and you also know how long they're going to last. It's very predictable. So those of us who are veteran users,
obviously,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, you're holding the actual real, what looks like a plant in front of you before you smoke it. So, and then, this is what interests me, because I just see so many products in, as I said, brightly colored packaging and beverages. And I'm the sort of person who just wouldn't trust any of that stuff. I just want the plant and then to use it in the way that I'm used to using it. Or, I fear the supermarket shelf type product when it comes to cannabis, because I just don't trust what's in it.
No, absolutely. And I do think one of the big disconnects, at least here in the States, is that a lot of consumers are still looking for high THC products. So a lot of them will come in, and the first thing they'll say to the bud tenders who are taking care of them is, I want the highest THC flower that you have. And I think it's because they think they're getting more value for their money, or they think they're going to get a better high or a more pronounced high, or they've just heard from someone else that they should ask for THC. So we are still seeing a big THC race in the United States, where that's what most cultivators are going for. They want that high testing percentage. So customers come in and say, I want your highest THC. And the person just hands it to them and they're off on their way. And that is such a disconnect between high THC might actually be the exact wrong thing for what you're trying to achieve. So you have to pay attention to, again, what your intentions are and to do a little research and get educated so that you're asking some of the right questions and getting some of the right product that, as you said, is not too
Yeah,
potent or
it's interesting
not just a
because
great brand. And
yeah, I was reading an article not too long ago about I can't remember what it's called because I can never remember all the names of these of these you know cannabis things, but there was a grower in California who wasn't licensed and he was growing cannabis that wasn't particularly high THC, but all the people who judge cannabis say this is the standard that you should measure your cannabis next to is what this guy is doing in his garage somewhere in, let's say it's Orange County or something. And I just find that really interesting because, as I say, as you say, the message from the big end of industry or through media is just constantly, you THC is something separate from the rest of the plant, and that's what's going to give you that high effect. But actually, the lower THC in conjunction with a bunch of other stuff is actually going to give you a better version of what you want to have, if that's what you want.
yeah, and that does lead to one of the industry issues too, which is sometimes they'll have conferences or shows and they'll do the cups. So you've seen the High Times cups, you've seen everyone wants to run their cups. And a lot of that is because you get sponsorship for that. So if you enter your cannabis there and you want to get the title of the best strain, you're going to have a booth there, you're going to have sponsorship there, and you're also going to submit your product. Other people submit their product too. But then it's sort of funny as to who wins. Why is that the best strain? That's the best strain for one person, maybe, or one type of person. But is it the best for the broadest group? Is it the best for the people who are feeling pain? Is it the best for people who want creativity? I would say, how can you have the best? It might be the best for you, but maybe not the best
Well,
for
exactly.
someone
Well,
else. It
I
might be the
mean,
worst for someone else.
exactly. I mean, anybody who's smoked cannabis for a while and knows other people is, as you get older, people go, well, no, thank you very much. I won't have that though, because, this is what works for me. I mean, that maturity as you get older, you just sort of become aware of those things, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. And but one of the nice things, at least about legalization, is it does give us more time to be patient and to try different products that we know that are tested, and we can start to learn about things, the other cannabinoids and learn about flavonoids and terpenes, the other parts of the plant that, in my opinion, have sort of a steering wheel effect. You may start in one direction, but depending on what terpenes, flavonoids, etc., you may kind of end up on a slightly different path, or it might take you exactly where you want to go. But again, the more you're educated, the more you're going to be able to take your time, figure things out, dial in your preferences, and become an educated, smart, healthy consumer.
But I mean, look, your book goes some way to formalizing that discussion. But how do you, as an educator, how do you think you can, because there's still a very small percentage of consumers understand how to get where they need to go. And there's a lot of people consuming with, 0 or 1% of knowledge. How, and because education, they're not going to educate people in schools about cannabis. They're not going to, how is this going to, how is this going to pan out in terms of educating the general populace? Because it's entirely different. People compare
Like
it to alcohol, but it's so entirely different. It's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it?
it is. So there's a couple things that I do. So one thing that I do is I try to provide public education wherever I can. So I do have a website called Our Community Harvest, a cannabis education company, and I put free content there. I also will do seminars. I also will do consultations with people. I'll also refer them to other sources. And then, of course, I have my books. But then, in a formal manner, I do teach at Stockton University, which is a Southern university in New Jersey. We have about 8,500 students, and we've had a minor in cannabis studies since 2018.
No, a long
So we were
time.
the first school that stepped up there. Yes. And then one thing that I've been doing, you've talked about it's been about 18 months. During that time, I was quite busy because I was the main architect for a major at Stockton in cannabis. So right now we have a Bachelor of Science in Hemp and Cannabis Business Management. So it is founded in business principles. Students take 80 hours of business classes, and then they take 8 additional cannabis and/or hemp courses, and that culminates with an internship or a capstone or independent study project. And so then that student goes out into the world with an actual major in cannabis business. And so that's part of my impact too, because I now have dozens and dozens of students that are in the industry. And I hope they've been paying attention, because I know that if they have, they'll be very good with customers about asking what they need and educating them, being patient with them, being compassionate, being loving, helping people. So that's another way that I think that I am making an impact, and it's through my students who are out there every day who are trying to help people.
So, and it's interesting, you talk about business, and that's sort of what Green Flower are dumping in tertiary organizations, a far more simplified version. I'm no fan of Green Flower, I can tell you. But what I'm really interested in is, how do you move from that to the humanities and thinking about cannabis in a way that it's part of society, which then will create further thinking in terms of creating solutions outside a business thinking environment. Is that part of the course? That are you trying to, because it's so nascent, I understand why nobody started it, but at some point you have to think like that, because you're not going to change the way that policymakers think, legislators think, doctors think, other professionals think, and where cannabis may only be 5% of what they deal with in any given week. But we need all those people to sort of understand the issues so that we have a more balanced approach. Because I do feel that it's still business, but the wider world is sort of, that's consigned to people having conversations in a private environment or on a LinkedIn or all those sorts of things. But I don't see it being formalized very quickly. Is that something that you're looking at to do next at Stockton?
Well, part of the curriculum, even though it comes from the business department, and that's one of the things where the reason it got instituted was you needed a department and you needed a dean and you needed a support person that was really going to put it in a certain place. So when I first started teaching at Stockton, I was in the science department. And then from there, they put me in general studies. And then from there, they put me in business. And that was because each of those departments had different levels of support. So we ended up in business, but there are a couple of very key classes that the students take, including a cannabis and social justice class. And that is where we go very deeply into why cannabis is prohibited in the United States and how crazy that is. We do look at other countries as well. And that's also where they do learn to talk about stigma, and they learn how to become an advocate. And an advocate can either be just talking to your circle of family and friends, that's advocacy. Or it can be on a bigger stage where maybe you want to go into government and policy. Or you can be an advocate by working in the industry and knowing your stuff. So I think that's a key class. We also have a communications class that talks about what language you use and how important that is, and how you frame your discussions, and how you try to bring people into the conversation, so that they can even start considering some of the possibilities of cannabis. And then we have cultivation classes. It is a pretty broad curriculum, even though, as you say, that it is still founded in business. And we kind of had a choice. When you look at curriculum across the United States in cannabis, the first courses and majors and minors were in cultivation. So it's kind of so appropriate that it started with the growth of the plant.
I know.
You have nothing else if you don't have the plant.
I'm not.
And then it went to science, and then it went to business.
It's difficult. You don't know where to start. Cultivation was obviously the most obvious way to start. But it's just trying to integrate that tertiary culture that you've managed to do at Stockton at other universities throughout the country. Now, obviously, your Yales, your Harvards, and your Berkeleys have been thinking about it for a while, but they don't. They still. It's more. It seems to stay with the academics and not be for the undergraduates, which to me is almost the wrong way around, because you want people going out into the world who are going to be they're 25 or whatever when they go out, or 24. They're the ones who are, will be changing the way that society thinks about these things, and actively manages that process as well.
Yeah, absolutely true. So one thing that I did do for 4 years was I ran a national cannabis curriculum convening. And so what I did is I gathered professors across the United States, roughly about 40, and we talked about what we teach in class. And these were undergraduate classes. We did have little vignettes where they could talk about their research, but primarily it was, let's look at the most popular courses in cannabis in the United States. And those are things like Introduction to Medical Cannabis, Social Justice in Cannabis, Cultivation, and cultivation divided into the unfortunate separation of hemp and cannabis with THC. So we basically spent an hour over 2 days on each of those courses, and we had a lead professor and then four other people on the panel that all talked about, well, what do you teach in class? What materials do you use? What questions come up? How do you deal with the administration? How do you bring the community into it? Do you do anything with helping students get jobs? So we gathered a very good, vibrant community, and I think together we met ourselves a little better by sharing what is working for us and what was not working for us.
Does the process of this create more questions than answers still?
Always, although Sean, I will tell you that certainly people who know me well, and especially my spouse, will always say that one of my questions that gets an answer leads to 1,000 more questions.
I know. Well, I'm always in
I
trouble
think,
for asking questions as well.
but I think that's one of the reasons why I love cannabis so much, is because as soon as you find an answer, it's a little bit like pulling a string. Then you have so many more questions to follow. And I really love almost every part of the plant and the discussion. I will say, except for if anybody asks me for investment advice, I'm not about that. I'm not about the money that way. And I don't care about it. But I do love cultivation. I love the science behind it. I love the history behind it, even though I am still kind of appalled by it. And that was the one thing that really drew me in. I am second generation Mexican American, and going through school, I almost never heard about any contributions that any Mexican ever made, good, bad, or neutral. So finally, when I heard about cannabis, and it was my people who were coming up over the border, and they brought the tradition of smoking a joint for the first time. People hadn't seen that. They were using tinctures that they got from the compounders. So all of a sudden, it was the Mexicans and then the Black jazz musicians that were targeted for using, and those were the groups that kind of came together. That all of a sudden I saw some reflection of my people in history, and that's why I became so obsessed with the history part
That's
of it.
why I say the humanities are so important, because
Yes.
it's like, if you know the history of anything, then that you have context, and if you have context, you can understand the present, and if you can understand the present, you can shape the future. I mean, any historian will tell you that. But for some reason, cannabis and psychedelics, and I would say the opiates as well, for some reason we can't have that discussion. It has to be. I remember when I was young, I would be always searching through dusty secondhand bookshops to find 20-year-old books, some that are very dull and some that became, in order to, that was the only way to educate myself in any way about these topics. And I get a sense today there is more education. Unfortunately, there's less books. Well, there's more books, but they're less read, I suppose. And I just think for young people, if they can, understand that context, it's really going to help them shape what they want or what they need for the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, like you, I love to look at the old cannabis books, and I have a very good collection. And so just recently, I was reading through and people will be either impressed or just stymied by this, but it was the 1974 report from Health and Human Services on what they knew about cannabis, and it was amazing to go through that book and to make the notes about what they got that we still think is spot on, and then other things that seem to be so far afield. And at certain times, you see some of the fears that are realistic, and sometimes you see some that are so unrealistic. But to realize that they were having this conversation 50 some years ago, and we could have made so much progress. We have wasted so much time. I mean, I'm glad during my lifetime that I've seen least some legalization around me. But I can't even imagine had we gone down a smart path and never banned cannabis and we still were using hemp and we also were still teaching people how to use cannabis as medicine. What a different world this would be.
We say this as I think we're approaching a world where there's some money behind people trying to bring us back to that prohibition mindset, and not just. I see it in Australia, I see it in Europe, I see it in the US. Interestingly, the places I don't see it are in the forward-thinking countries, in the Southern Hemisphere, the South America, in parts of Africa, and parts of Asia as well. So Asia is diametric opposites, and one countries next to one another think entirely differently about these things. But I do worry that they're trying to everything we've learned. People are trying to push that under the carpet again. Do you get a sense of that, and how we approach that? And well, we have to be, as you say, we have to teach the younger to be a bit more somewhat activist, and remember that it wasn't arrived too easily, and you shouldn't lose it.
Yeah, we do see that. I mean, even in the states right now, in a state like Massachusetts that legalized adult use and medical use some time ago, there is efforts to repeal that, to repeal adult use. And they're gathering signatures and they're also putting information out there. I think one of the big disconnects, or one thing that's always interesting, is that for people who oppose cannabis, the selective research that they use. And so oftentimes you'll hear people talk about the damages and then they'll say, oh, it's in this particular research report. Well, as you know, if you ever look at research, there's differing point of views. And you could look at the research, look at the funding, look at the attention, look at the background of the person who's doing it, and then look at the other research and see what they're saying as well. And you really have to put a lot of that together. And there's also a lot of people that will say, well, there is no research. You say, no, just go to PubMed, just go to PubMed and
Exactly.
put in the word cannabis, see how many results you get. Put in the word hemp, put in the word marijuana, see what you'll get. And you'll get, I mean, in the last few years, there are over 10,000 studies. I mean, that's another difficulty, though, at least in the States, is that the studies that want to fund negative or neutral effects are funded at a rate of about 20 to 1 compared to anything in cannabis research that wants to show something positive. So if I'm a researcher, and of course I want to get paid, if you look at things like the psychosis debate, the addiction debate, things like that, those will get funded so much quicker than if I want to show that CBD is helpful for arthritis.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the FDA just came out with some numbers saying that teenage use was down. But if you read all the reports, over the last 6 months, funded by whomever, you would think the story was entirely different. So yeah, it's pretty hard. I mean, for the likes of you and me, I'm a journalist, you're an academic. It's quite easy to read between the lines and understand how these things work. But for the general populace, and especially with the attention span of social media, where they feed you, all this information is in a 15-second bite. It's virtually impossible for them, isn't it, to really work out the reality against what information they've been fed to them by funded media or research.
Yeah, and also oftentimes the negative effects make much better headlines.
Of course they do.
So you see those flashy headlines, and that's what people will start reading about versus something as boring as CBD helping a child with epilepsy. People might not be as interested in that.
Talking about all of this in your sort of neck of the woods, what's happening in New Jersey? For me, it's been fairly quiet recently, not too much excitement. Does that mean that things are just sort of ticking along quite nicely in your state?
Yeah, yes and no. So we have a couple of our bigger issues, or a couple of our pain points right now, is that New Jersey we're a very densely populated state, the most densely populated in the United States, 9.2 million people. But we have 563 roughly townships in our state. And we are very much about letting the townships do what the townships want to do. even though they're small. It could be a township of 2,000 people, but they get to govern their own little cannabis kingdom the way they want to. And when we set up our rules, we allowed each of those municipalities to opt out of the cannabis business if they wanted to, or to opt in. And they could opt in into any type of business at any level. So we have 6 different license types. So if you're in a township, maybe you say, we don't want to allow any cannabis whatsoever. Well, that's one choice. We want to allow cultivation only, and we'll allow one of them or 2 of them. And we can also designate our zoning so they can be in a certain place. So unfortunately, what's happened is places that have opted in, you have too many operators jumping in there often. And then we have cannabis deserts too. So I just did a research report last summer for the city of Atlantic City because they wanted to look at a potential cap on the number of dispensaries because they are an impoverished city of about 29,000 residents. But then, of course, you have 20 million visitors coming in there. And they had roughly 16 dispensaries. On one block in Atlantic City, I can see 5 dispensaries. Well, you can imagine if you're a local citizen or tourist or whatever, what happens? They'll go to each place or they'll find the discounts. So they all undercut their prices. We're also kind of a young market, so they pretty much have a lot of the same product. So in all those 5 stores, I'm going to find the same brands roughly at the same price. So why am I going to go to X, Y, or Z? I may go to all of them. So because because of that, and because they had approved an additional 40 dispensaries in a pipeline at different stages, the city said, "Hey, we have to look at doing a dispensary cap because we're going to get oversaturated." Well, they already pretty much were. So the results of my study were that yes, they needed to put in a cap, at least a temporary cap right away, and then take a look at what the market would allow, and then also look at other people who are trying to get started. And if they're far enough along, you have to grandfather them in. And if they're not, you can give them a deadline.
Those
Go ahead.
dispensaries, just interesting. We don't have long to go. I could have another 60-minute conversation with you about this stuff. Are those dispensaries run by local Atlantic City residents, or are they owned quietly by bigger organizations, or are they owned fairly openly by bigger organizations? So basically, are you getting a pathway version of cannabis just all the way down the high street, which obviously doesn't look so good, does it, after a while?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And the one thing we did find was that by and large, it is owned by the bigger corporations and for people who are not from the city of Atlantic City. And so one of my recommendations actually for the cap was to reserve 25% of the dispensaries for social equity applicants or for micro licenses, which translates into local population citizens of that township. So I thought it was important because Atlantic City, when they started their whole program, part of what they said is this is going to help our population. This is going to help our local citizens. And so in order to help them fulfill that promise, I thought it was so crucial that you should hold back at least 25% of all the dispensaries for your local population because they promised that to them.
And I think when I last looked at it, in terms of it was a sort of 50-50 across the state, people who said yay and those who said nay. Subsequently, has those sorts of numbers changed?
Actually, we had much better numbers. So what happened was we had 2 failed legislative attempts, and then finally, when it went to the general public, we approved it at about 66%. So and we were one of the states that approved at the highest rates. Maryland got 70, slightly over 70%, but New Jersey was very high. And of the 563 municipalities, only 3 of them voted that they did not want to approve cannabis. But then, of course, the hypocrisy is so. Here's my township, and 55% of the people, or certainly a majority, voted yes. But then the administrators say, well, we're not going to allow cannabis in our township. Although the other funny wrinkle is you cannot deny delivery into your township. So
Okay.
if you can find a place that can deliver, even if your township said we don't want to have any cannabis businesses in our town, they can't stop you from getting online or making a phone call and getting it delivered to your door. Although, of course, the delivery trucks have no branding on them. They have locks on them. They have cameras, permanently mounted GPS, all those sorts of things on it, but they can't stop you from getting it delivered to your home.
So are we are we feeling positive about New Jersey and not, I look at Massachusetts as my main basket case example of how not to run a state. And on the East Coast, I always think, oh, New Jersey is, it's not doing too badly compared to everybody else. Do you still feel that way?
I think for the most part, we're on the right path. So we're above 250 dispensaries at the moment. So dispensaries continue to open up, and more townships are now considering cannabis. So we are getting some new locations, which is quite good. We're seeing many more manufacturers now. So we are starting to see some innovation in the product availability that we have. So that part is all good. We are having some major issues with our infused beverages. And that is in part, that's a whole nother conversation about all the
we've got 4 minutes.
synthetic hemp powder.
If we started on beverages, we'd be here for the next 4 hours.
We absolutely would. So that's another thing that you really can't find. You can't really get an infused beverage in dispensaries, and that could be a big part of the market as well. So we're on the right path. We are still growing. We still have too many dispensaries in some areas and too few in others. But by and large, we are seeing social equity applicants, women-owned businesses, small businesses that are at least getting open now, and hopefully they'll get some traction and they'll keep going. But we're still a state that's mainly controlled by some of the biggest players.
Well, Rob, sorry I don't have more time to talk to you. Thank you very much for telling us about the book, what you're doing at the university, and just giving us a quick overview of the state as well, because I hadn't spoken to anybody about New Jersey for a while. So that sort of gives us a little bit of insight of where we are. Thank you very much, and best of luck with the book when it comes out. And do stay in touch. Thanks for being on the Karma Koala podcast.
Thank you so much, Sean. Pleasure as always.
Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalization. Coming how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.